What if I told you the global economy is not really held together by markets alone, or central banks alone, or even governments alone? What if it is held together by a handful of narrow passages on a map, tiny stretches of water, thin arteries of trade, places most people never think about until they break? And when they break, oil spikes, shipping costs explode, inflation comes back, and markets start repricing the future in real time. That is the real story here. The global economy looks massive, diversified, and complex. But underneath it all, it is shockingly dependent on a few maritime choke points. And if just one of them gets blocked, restricted, attacked, or drought-stricken, the ripple effects move across fuel, food, freight, manufacturing, and finance almost instantly. Let's start with the most dangerous one right now, the Strait of Hormuz. This is not just another shipping lane. It is one of the most important energy arteries on Earth. The EIA says roughly 20% of global petroleum liquids consumption and about a quarter of global seaborne oil trade move through Hormuz. It is also a key route for LNG exports, especially from Qatar. So when this choke point is threatened, the world is not just pricing in a military conflict. It is pricing in fuel shortages, transport disruption, higher input costs, and a new inflation wave. And that is exactly why markets react so violently to Gulf headlines. Reuters reported that the current Iran conflict has disrupted flows, forced output cuts in multiple Gulf producers, and pushed countries and companies into emergency workarounds. This is why Hormuz is not just a regional issue. It is a global pricing machine. If Hormuz tightens, the cost of moving the world goes up. Now move west to the Suez Canal. Suez is one of those routes the world takes for granted until ships stop moving through it. Reuters reported in 2024 that the canal handles roughly 12% to 15% of global trade and about 25% to 30% of container traffic. The Atlantic Council similarly describes it as carrying about 12% to 15% of worldwide trade and about 30% of global container traffic, with more than $1 trillion in goods moving through annually. That means Suez is not just an Egyptian canal. It is one of the main speed lanes connecting Asia, Europe, and beyond. When Suez is disrupted, ships reroute around the Cape of Good Hope. That adds distance, time, insurance cost, fuel burn, and congestion. UNCTAD warned that disruptions around Suez and Panama increased vessel demand and container ship demand because the whole system becomes less efficient when ships are forced onto longer routes. So Suez matters not only because of the cargo it handles, but because it compresses time. And in trade, time is money. Then there is the Panama Canal, which shows us a different kind of vulnerability. Hormuz is a geopolitical choke point. Suez is a geopolitical and security choke point. Panama is increasingly a climate choke point. The canal's freshwater system made it highly vulnerable to drought in 2023 and 2024, and that sharply reduced transit capacity. But as of March 2026, Reuters reported Panama had recovered enough water to operate at top capacity, with 36 to 38 vessels per day. That matters because Panama's story is a warning. Not every choke point has to be attacked to become a global problem. Some choke points can be throttled by weather, hydrology, and climate volatility. And when that happens, global shipping does not stop, it gets more expensive and less efficient. Even after recovery, the lesson remains the same. Critical trade infrastructure is now vulnerable not only to missiles and militias, but to nature itself. Now go east to the Strait of Malacca. If Hormuz is the energy artery and Suez is the trade shortcut, Malacca is the hinge of Asia. CSIS estimates trillions of dollars in trade pass through the South China Sea each year, with the Strait of Malacca serving as the most widely used gateway between the Indian and Pacific Oceans. CSIS also notes that in 2016, almost 80% of China's oil imports passed through the South China Sea via Malacca. That is why people talk about China's Malacca dilemma. It is not just a shipping issue, It is a strategic vulnerability. A disruption there would not just hurt China. It would hit supply chains across East Asia, electronics, manufacturing, energy imports, and the rhythm of interregional trade. Malacca is one of those places where global commerce looks efficient only because the route is open. Once it is constrained, everybody remembers how narrow the system really is. This is the deeper point. Choke points create leverage. A country or actor does not need to control the whole global economy to shake it. It may only need to pressure one narrow lane. That is why these waterways matter so much in strategy, markets, and diplomacy. They are not just routes. They are levers. And because the world is trying to move massive volumes of oil, gas, containers, chemicals, food, and manufactured goods through very specific corridors, resilience is often an illusion. We talk about globalization as if it means endless flexibility. But in practice, globalization still depends on a small number of physical bottlenecks. Now, can the world adapt? Yes, but only partially. Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline is a perfect example. Reuters reported that Saudi Arabia can pump up to 7 million barrels per day to Yanbu through that pipeline, but only about 5 million barrels per day may be available for exports once local refinery needs are accounted for. In other words, alternatives help, but they do not fully replace Hormuz. They reduce damage. They do not erase dependency. The same goes for the U.S. energy response. Reuters reported that the Trump administration used Defense Production Act powers to restart California's Sable pipeline system, with the operator aiming for 50,000 barrels per day by April 1st. That may help at the margin, but compared with Hormuz's scale flows, it is small. The bigger Texas refinery story is real too. Reuters reported Trump announced a Reliance-backed 168,000 barrel per day refinery at Brownsville with a 20-year offtake arrangement. But again, these are longer cycle adjustments, not instant substitutes for a disrupted choke point. This is where some videos start talking about ambitious alternatives like the Ben Gurion Canal. There have indeed been decades-old proposals for an Israeli alternative route connecting the Red Sea and Mediterranean, but that is best understood as a long-discussed strategic concept, not a near-term fix for global choke point risk. The real near-term story is rerouting, pipelines, reserve releases, and redundancy, not a brand-new canal rescuing the system tomorrow. So the takeaway is bigger than any single crisis. The global economy is not only fragile because debt is high, inflation is sticky, or geopolitics are tense. It is fragile because the physical map of trade is narrow. Hormuz, Suez, Panama, Malacca. These are some of the world's real pressure points. And once you see that, you understand the modern economy differently. You understand why oil jumps on a missile headline, why freight rates surge when ships reroute, why one canal drought matters to factories on another continent, why markets can rally or crash based on a single statement about one stretch of water. Because in a hyper-connected world, the narrowest places often matter most. And the future of power may belong not only to the nations with the biggest economies, but to those who can protect, threaten, bypass, or ensure the choke points that keep the whole machine moving. A good closing line for the video is, globalization looks vast, until you realize it depends on a few narrow lanes.